Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Mike's Jurisdiction. It makes me happy. Guys, I'm happy right now. I'm happy that I can finally say another. That means this is at least the second episode, right? Which means I guess I'm taking this seriously now. I guess this is a thing. I guess this is what we're doing. And this entire episode today is going to be about self-defense. We're going to talk about this wild case, this wild story, People v. Goetz. It's about a man who shot up some kids on a subway and claimed self-defense. And all this happened in New York. We're not going to talk about that just yet because I stumbled across a pretty interesting Twitter video and I wanted to talk about it a little bit, okay? So there was this video that I was watching and a UFC fighter by the name of Marlon Chito Vera had his house broken into I want to say the night before his fight with Sean O'Malley, okay? And in this clip, Cheeto says he doesn't really like the state of the law in the United States because if somebody was to come into his home and he was to shoot them, then he would go to jail. And I'll go ahead and play that clip for everybody that's watching and listening.
My house got broke in. I find out the morning of the fight, which is not a good day to find out some fucking piece of shit. Break your beautiful French door, take your safe with some money on it that it doesn't cost cheap, roll it through my front yard, all on video.
Fuck.
It's fuck. So I'm like, who the fuck set up the fucking law? Because that don't make sense to me. If you walk into my house, you with a hood and the lantern, they fucking shot you. I go to jail. So I don't know, dude.
Some sort of self-defense, right? Okay, so the first thing that I thought of was the Castle Doctrine. And the Castle Doctrine it's a big thing here in Missouri. It's a big thing here in St. Louis, Missouri, okay? The Castle Doctrine it essentially says that you don't have the duty to retreat in your own home and you are able to use lethal force in your own home without retreating if it's reasonable. Okay, and there's a little bit of a presumption of it being reasonable. That's what the Castle Doctrine is. And there's some nuances to it, like, for example, it can extend even beyond the insides of your home, which is crazy. There's portions of it that allow that, which is wild. But I was thinking, okay, could Cheeto claim the Castle Doctrine? And then I'm like, okay, well, where does Cheeto live? Cheeto lives in California. Does California have the Castle Doctrine? And I looked up, and it turns out they have a version of it, okay? It was passed under the California Home Protection Bill of Rights. I want to say it's section 198.5. It's use of deadly force by any person within his or her residence against an intruder. And there is a presumption of fear of death or great bodily injury, okay? There's a couple cases that give some clarifications. We don't have to go super far in depth. So Duran v. City of Maywood, this was decided in 2000. It essentially talks about the rebuttable presumption that a homeowner acts reasonably when they use force against a person who enters unlawfully. Okay, and there's this other case, People v. Hardin, and it talks about this idea of proportionality, and the question of proportionality is tilted in favor of the homeowner. Essentially, like, did they use too much force? People v. Hardin says that the scales, right? The scales are already in favor of the homeowner if somebody enters unlawfully to use force to protect themselves if they fear for their own lives. Okay? So California does have a version of the Castle Doctrine, right? So would Cheeto have been okay? The answer is probably. He probably wouldn't have been okay, and it depends on what time of the day and a whole bunch of other circumstances that were to happen. So I'm going to give you guys two scenarios. One scenario where he would have been fine, and another scenario where he might not have been fine, okay? And I just want to say that, I am a 2L law student, okay? This is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer. I am on my way, but I am not currently a lawyer. So don't take it as such, all right? Okay, so scenario number one, where I think Cheeto would be fine to use lethal force and he wouldn't get thrown into jail and charged with a crime and this, that, and the third. So let's say it's 3 a.m. Somebody enters into his home unlawfully. His entire family is there. He wakes up, doesn't realize who it is, goes downstairs, sees a random person, shoots them. Okay, I would say, I think most people would say that it's pretty reasonable to use lethal force at that point in time. If somebody enters into your home at 3 a.m. and there's no idea to understand who that person is, he would probably be okay there, all right, under this castle doctrine, under this California version, under the California Home Protection Bill of Rights, okay? Scenario number 2, where I think he would probably not be okay, all right? Let's say it's an individual that enters his home at noon, all right? And let's play the really terrible situation. Let's say it's somebody who honestly accidentally goes into his home, right? You could say it's an elderly person and that person doesn't really know where they are. Maybe it's a kid and they think they're going to a friend's house to play. Somebody enters into his home at noon and they're walking around, right? If Cheeto has a gun and shoots them at that point in time, that's probably unreasonable, right? I would say that's probably not okay. But again, because that question of proportionality is tilted in favor of the homeowner, you'd really have to prove that it was unreasonable to use that amount of lethal force. And again, this is all a question for a jury. That's essentially what this is a question for. So, in regards to Cheeto's clip, I would say, buddy, if someone comes into your home and steals your shit and is rummaging through your drawers at 3 a.m., I think you'd be okay. I don't think you'd be thrown in jail if you did something to stop him, right? Okay, but again, this is not legal advice, okay? Please do not take it as such. Good God, I'm a 2L law student. I am just spitballing here, okay? I'm just spitballing here. So I guess then the idea is, well, what if your state doesn't follow the castle doctrine? All right, I don't know of the states that don't follow it, but they definitely exist, okay? They definitely exist, right? Well, if your state doesn't follow the castle doctrine, they follow a version of this rule, okay? And this rule came from People v. Goetz. And I'm going to just say what the rule is right now, and then we'll get into the case. Essentially, a person is justified in using deadly force in self-defense or defense of another only if she objectively and reasonably believes that an attacker is either using or about to use deadly force or committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, forcible rape, forcible sodomy, or robbery, okay? That's essentially the rule that came out of People v. Goetz. Now, this is not a black letter law. This is not a bright line rule. This is not something that's followed, to a T by every single state, but it's a general idea of how self-defense is looked at. Essentially, is it reasonable? That's really what a lot of these criminal laws come down to. Is something reasonable, right? Does it make sense? Does it seem okay to an average person, right? So that's essentially the rule that you would use if your state doesn't follow the castle doctrine. So let's get into People v. Goetz, because good God, this is a tough case, okay? And if you guys hear me laughing, that's just because things can get uncomfortable, and then at that point, I don't really know how to react. Let's just talk about People v. Goetz. So People v. Goetz was a case that was decided in 1986 in New York. Now, who is Goetz? Well, Goetz is Berhnard Goetz. Berhnard Goetz was born to German immigrant parents in Queens, New York. His dad was Lutheran, and his mom was Jewish. Goetz attended a boarding school in Switzerland as a child, and he eventually returned to the United States to get his bachelor's degree in electrical and nuclear engineering from NYU. So, smart guy, right? I mean, there's pretty much no dispute in that. You get a degree in engineering, you're smart. You get a degree in electrical and nuclear engineering, you're really smart. You get a degree from NYU, you're definitely smart, okay? Goetz eventually moved to Florida to work at his father's business. He was married after a divorce. Shocker. Goetz moved back to New York City. When he was in New York City, he applied for a conceal permit, and shocker again, he was denied, right? Goetz was a known racist, which is kind of wild that there's things out there, there's information out there that Goetz is just unknown racist, right? His neighbor, Myra Friedman, reported overhearing Goetz saying, and there's some words I will not be saying here, The only way we're going to clean up the street is to get rid of the, insert racial slurs here. I will not be saying that. So Berhnard Goetz, good guy, bad guy, average guy? Probably not a good guy. Okay? So it's a good idea to know who Berhnard Goetz is before we get into the facts of this case. Okay? So Berhnard Goetz is the defendant in this case. Berhnard Goetz gets on to a subway train. Okay? He gets onto a subway train and he has a loaded gun on him. All right? He has a loaded, I don't know, Glock, something. I don't know. He has a loaded gun on him in the subway train in the 80s. Okay? 4 kids, Troy Canty, Daryl Cabby, James Ramseur, and Barry Allen approached Goetz. Okay? 4 kids approached Goetz and they walked up and they said, "Give me $5. Okay? And I want to say it's pretty undisputed what they said. I think there was some argument back and forth. I believe that at one point they were trying to say, "Can we have $5?" And then it got nailed down to, "Give me $5. That's essentially what they said, right? 2 of the kids had screwdrivers in their pockets. Not a single one of them had a gun. All right? Not a single one of them had a gun. 2 of them had screwdrivers. Maybe they were holding the screwdrivers in their pocket to make it look like guns, but nobody had guns. And keep in mind, these were kids. So Goetz pulled out an unlicensed gun, an unlicensed weapon. As you guys remember, he applied for a concealed permit earlier, and he didn't get it. Goetz pulled out an unlicensed gun with 5 rounds already loaded and shot all 4 of them. He shot one of them in the chest, one of them in the back, and another in his side. And this is where it gets really, really, really fucked up. So the last boy, Goetz, he missed him. He didn't hit him. So he went back and stood over the kid and fired again. And this is according to Goetz himself. There's interview tapes out there where Goetz literally says what he did. Goetz said, he bent down to Cabby and said, "You don't look so bad. Here's another." Goetz then shot Cabby point blank, severing his spinal cord and leaving him paralyzed and with brain damage. Goetz told the conductor that the kids were trying to rob him, right? Now, this fact right here is interesting, right? Because Goetz said that because he was trying to justify the fact that he felt his life was in danger, that he thought it's reasonable to shoot these 4 kids because he was about to be robbed. That's his argument. That's why he said that to the conductor. Goetz, like we said, is a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He walked onto a subway car with a loaded gun, put himself in a situation where he would be able to fire, and he did some horrible, horrible things. Now, this is something that isn't really reported too much, but Goetz actually fled the state. He left New York. He went to Bennington, Vermont, and he was there for a while. About 9 days later. 9 days. Okay, so over a week, right? So this is interesting. 9 days later, he surrendered to the police, and I believe he surrendered in Vermont? I can't remember exactly. But this idea of fleeing the police, in my opinion, shows culpability. It shows that he knows he did something wrong. There was something that he did wrong, or else you wouldn't flee from the police, right? Now that just, might be my mind going crazy, but that's what I assumed. So before he fled New York, he burned the jacket that he was wearing. The jacket that he was wearing in the subway car when he shot those 4 kids, he burned it, and he scattered pieces of his revolver in the woods, okay? So let's think about it here, right? He flees the state. He burns the jacket that he was wearing, and he takes the revolver and he takes it apart and throws it all throughout the woods. Does that sound like the actions of a man who thinks he did nothing wrong? Probably not, okay? Now that makes the ending of this case so tragic. And Goetz told the police that he didn't think that the kids had weapons on them, and he was afraid because he had been, quote, maimed in the past. Okay, he'd been mugged in the past, and that was more justification of why he felt like his life was in danger, because he had been mugged in the past and he was on a subway car, didn't want to be mugged again, so he thought it would be reasonable to shoot 4 kids, and then on the 4th one he missed, so he goes back for more. Goetz thought that was reasonable. Okay, hopefully you can sense the sarcasm in my voice. During his interrogation, Goetz was asked what his intentions were when he drew the revolver, when he got his gun out, right? They're trying to figure out what's in his head, what's in his brain. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to protect himself? Or was he trying to kill somebody? And Goetz said this: "My intention was to murder them, to hurt them, to make them suffer as much as possible." Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're a defense attorney, you are throwing up right now because you've just lost your case. If you're a prosecutor, you're looking at that and you're thinking, now there's no way this is going to be this easy, right? The defendant literally just said, my intention was to murder them. Mens rea? I mean, that's it. That's it. That's what he was there for. It was no self-defense. He was there to kill him. And that's what he said. That's what Goetz said. He volunteered this information freely and voluntarily. Later in the interrogation, Goetz said, if I had more bullets, I would have shot them all again and again. My problem was I ran out of bullets. Bro. I mean, this guy is digging his own grave. All of these things that he is saying is not pointing towards self-defense. It's pointing towards this guy got on the subway car to try to kill some people. That's what he was there for. He wanted to use his weapon in a lethal way. He wanted to kill some people. Now, this is the rich part of everything, right? Goetz denies any premeditation for the shooting. He says, no, trust me, I didn't premeditate anything. There was no thought behind any of this. Well, the words that you said kind of show a different story. My intention was to murder them, but I deny premeditation. Okay, so, Berhnard, you're a smart guy, right? Those two things don't work with each other. They don't make sense. And this is something that he does say later in the interrogation. I was going to gouge one of their eyes out, and he was referring to Canty, with my keys afterwards. Goetz said he stopped once he saw the fear in his eyes. I mean, this guy's claiming self-defense. He's claiming self-defense, but every single word that comes out of this motherfucker's mouth is screaming premeditation, is screaming insane, is screaming, I wanted to murder them. So what was the verdict? What happened? Goetz was acquitted of attempted murder and first-degree assault charges. He was convicted of criminal possession of a firearm. Goetz was sentenced to 1 year in jail, and he only served 8 months. Wild. Now, how did this happen, right? Well, Goetz put on the defense that he feared for his life, that he was just there for self-defense. That was what the weapon was there for. It was all self-defense, right? And again, I read the rule a little bit earlier, but I'll read it again. The rule that came out of this was, in New York, a person is justified in using deadly force in self-defense or defense of another if he or she objectively and reasonably believes an attacker is either 1, using or about to use deadly force, or committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, forcible rape, forcible sodomy, or robbery, right? So Berhnard Goetz claims that they objectively and reasonably believed that the attacker was about to rob them, essentially, or use deadly force. Fucked up, man. Fucked up. Okay, so but it doesn't end there. It doesn't, right? Goetz was not found guilty of murder or homicide. However, he was held civilly liable. All right. So he wasn't put in jail, but his pockets were fucking robbed. All right. He wasn't robbed on the train, but he was correctly robbed later in life, which is, I would say it's a good thing. All right. Sue me. Right. Not like Goetz, though. That would be bad. Cabby, one of the boys who was injured, he was the boy that was stood over by Goetz and said, "Oh, you look good. Here's another." That child was one of the boys that was injured, and he obtained a $43 million civil judgment, and that $43 million civil judgment is worth about $80 million today, which is crazy. Crazy stuff. So Goetz at the time was viewed as a hero in New York. The New York press deemed him as the subway vigilante. That's what New York press called him. New York City experienced unprecedented rates of crimes during the 1980s. On average, 38 crimes a day happened in the city's subway system. So when the incident went down, it isn't shocking how New York citizens reacted. This is a quote. "Finally, someone has the courage to stand up to these thugs." Okay. Goetz had so many fans supporting him at all times during all of his court proceedings. Goetz was able to garner so much notoriety. He actually ran for mayor in 2001, but he lost badly. R.I.P. Bozo. Okay. This event sparked NRA campaigns to loosen, conceal, and carry restrictions. The shooting even helped inspire the 2019 Joker film, which, by the way, fire film, fire movie, loved it. Apparently, the main character in the movie, obviously the Joker, was based in part on Goetz. Todd Phillips, who wrote, produced, and directed the film, grew up in New York City. He said that he remembered the 1984 shooting vividly. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the one scene in the Joker. Spoilers, okay? Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but I mean, God, it's 2019. Like, get a grip, guys. One of the scenes in the Joker was a scene on the subway where the Joker essentially killed 4 people. Now, the 4 people that he killed, maybe it was 5, 4 or 5 people that he killed were not kids, okay? They were grown adults, so they made it, I guess, a little bit less intense in the movie, which is probably fair. That's probably good. But it's kind of messed up because even to this day, 2024, Goetz stands on his decision. He actually had an interview in 2004 with CNN's Nancy Grace, and Goetz said this: "I think it was good for New York City. What happened was a very good thing for New York City because it forced them to address crime." Now, if you guys are listening and not watching, I just shook my head. Because, like, bro, it should not take a tragedy for people to do their jobs. It shouldn't. Okay? So we can, on one hand, say this should not have happened. Those 4 boys should not have been gunned down. And that New York should get their shit together with the crimes on the subway. Okay? And they did, eventually. This was a really, really messed up case that's honestly really sad. But it goes to show you that you have to reasonably fear for your life. That's what it comes down to, which makes sense, right? It makes sense. If you're in a park walking all by yourself and, I don't know, you're a 5'3" girl, you weigh 105 pounds, and some massive guy comes up and runs behind you, and you happen to have a concealed carry, and the guy comes up, grabs you, if you take your gun and you shoot him in the chest, I don't think any jury would convict you of murder. I don't think any jury would convict you of any version of homicide, because it's reasonable to assume that you would fear for your life, and if you didn't do what you did, you probably wouldn't be here to talk about it. So that is self-defense, and self-defense in the Castle Doctrine is one of the more interesting subsections of criminal law. I think it's interesting for people that enjoy the prosecutor side, and I think it's interesting for people that enjoy the defense side. And so in this podcast, I'm probably going to be talking about this a lot. Honestly, I'm probably going to be talking about it a lot. And guys, that is it. That is it for this week's episode of Mike's Jurisdiction. And I will be back next week. I have a little bit of an idea of what I want to talk about, but these are just a lot of fun for me to just talk about stuff. I really like it. I really like finding these wild cases and talking to you guys about it. But if you guys have, any questions, you guys can feel free to comment on my YouTube, comment on my Spotify, follow my TikTok, whatever it may be. And, well, I guess that's it, guys. I guess that's it. I will see you all next week. Goodbye.